Well, let me tell you about myself, about what living in Venezuela is like, what living in Venezuela is like today, now that I'm not there too, and what it was in the past. I think that the example of Venezuela is the most relevant example for Americans to learn of a socialist country. And that is because it is the only country, to my knowledge, that has become so totalitarian and it's currently in power, a socialist regime that started democratically. That was not the case in Cuba. That was not the case in the USSR. That was not the case in China. That was not the case in North Korea, which were all violent revolutions where the people had no democratic choice, right? Venezuelans voted for Hugo Chavez, a convicted murderer, by the way, in 1998, who had attempted to gain power violently in 1992 in a coup, was jailed, then pardoned by the following president in a terrible mistake, and then ran for office and won. That's how does that get to happen? And what were the consequences of that? Well, the consequences were that my parents, who owned a gas station in Venezuela, it was imagine like most small business owners in this country, a BP gas station, regular thing. They were making a few $1,000s a month, like most American middle-class families do. When we went from that to making $2 a day by the year 2016, which is, according to the United Nations, the international extreme poverty line. How do you go from that? And imagine if that's what happened to a middle-class family, what happened to somebody who made less money before 20 years prior, right? That's why you saw 6 million of us leave in the last 5 years. Currently, the Venezuelan refugee crisis is about to become the largest refugee crisis in the world, more than the Syrians. And that happened in a country that was democratic, that has the largest oil reserves on the planet, that has gold, uranium, more water, available per person, and there's no electricity, there's no water in our homes. Internet is extremely bad quality, even though there's still some internet. And we're becoming like Cuba. Venezuelans who were told that we would never become like Cuba, that, Venezuela is not an island. Come on. Venezuela has oil. Cuba didn't have oil. Of course, oil is going to protect you. If that happens here, how could that happen? We're a democracy. Cuba, it was a coup, right? It was a revolution. That cannot happen democratically, a socialist government. Chavez even lied to the population and said, I'm not going to nationalize the means of production. I'm not going to take over everything. But we knew he was friends with Fidel Castro. We knew that he was supportive of expansive government. And the people who were smart were the people who left 20 years ago when he entered power. Every time I meet Venezuelans, I ask, when did you leave? That's the first question. And if they say, oh, yeah, I left 20 years ago, I say, oh, so you were one of the smart ones. And it's the truth. I left Venezuela in 2016 after I finished high school. I didn't see a future for myself. Even if I went to college there, even if I had gotten a graduate degree in Venezuela, the best I could have hoped for is being able to feed myself and my family. That's it. That was the best hope I could achieve. And I didn't want that. And I was fortunate enough that Venezuela was a country that, even though it was a socialist totalitarian state, the regime got in power after the internet already existed. So Venezuela is a much more well-connected country and informed than many other totalitarian regimes like Cuba or even China, perhaps. And I saw what the world was like, right? As a kid, I had been able to travel to America when my parents were able to afford it. And I knew what the United States was like. And I wanted to be like that. I wanted to live in a place like that. And so I learned English. I, prepared to apply for colleges. I was blessed to obtain a scholarship to full ride to start in Indiana, and that's how I ended up in Indiana. People always ask me, how did that Venezuelan kid ended up in Indianapolis? I had never heard of Indiana before in my life, I must admit. But it's the state that welcomed me, and it's the state that I love the most, and I feel like a Hoosier in my heart. And it is a great experience, but it also taught me many things. When I came to America, I saw people who supported the ideas that I had fled from in college campuses. even professors who challenged me that, and I can tell you specifically, an English professor challenged me and told me that this was the fault of the United States because of, the typical leftist argument, imperialism and sanctions and all of this. For people who think that the US is imperialist and that we need to disengage from the world, they have a very US-centric view to think that everything has to do with the United States outside of this country. That's not the case. What happened in Venezuela was not the fault of the United States. It was the fault of the policies implemented by Hugo Chavez, policies such as price controls on absolutely everything that was still privately owned. So while he nationalized many companies, especially the large ones, banks, vast tracts of land, the gas station that my parents owned, and my parents became employees of the government, living off subsidies. There were still many private businesses, especially consumer goods, restaurants. And what the government did was that to tame the inflation they created by printing money to pay for government spending, they blamed businesses being greedy. Where have I heard that now, right? Now it's inflation, here's the fault of greedy businesses. They blamed it on that, and then they imposed price controls. The government told you as a business owner at how much you could sell everything. The consequence was shortages. That's what made me want to study economics, right? I was living in an economics 101 lesson. Price controls create shortages. Printing money to pay for government spending creates inflation. With the lack of private incentives by the government nationalizing things creates what? A failed state-owned enterprise. And because of that, my mom, who, to supplement her income, she started selling chocolates. She made bonbons for first communions, marriages, baptism, mostly religious events. And she made all this. She's a fantastic cook, by the way. So if she's here, I'm. The truth is that she had to buy chocolate illegally because it was price controlled. And imagine having to hide chocolate inside bags as if it was drugs. That's what daily life was like. When I was in school, sometimes my teachers would dismiss class because they found chicken in the supermarket down the few blocks. They had a friend who was a cashier. They texted them, hey, there's toilet paper in the supermarket now. Come over, Maria. And then oh, sorry, kids, it's time to dismiss class because I have to go buy things for my family. And that's a totally understandable thing to do. But what are the consequences, right? So these ripple down effects. Water sometimes would go out of my apartment for several weeks. We would collect it from the rain. Imagine going from living like an American middle-class family to having to collect water from the rain within a lifetime, within my childhood. That's how fast things happen. Now it's gradual, right? 20 years is not an immediate period, but it is easily within all of our lifetimes. And so that really affected me and made me want to avoid that from ever happening again. I studied economics. That's why I'm doing a PhD in economics. I know that the previous panel was about education. And I do think that that's how we change things. I think that the reason that Venezuela became the way it became initially is through democratic means, then, of course, totally totalitarian. Now the Venezuelan people don't support what's going on. Was because the regime they were able to sow envy in the population. Envy from the rich that we had to take from the capitalists to give to the poor, right? That was the fault of the rich, that they were poor. They were able to sow that hate and that envy, and that's where socialism comes from. Envy is a natural feeling, that's why it's one of the capital sins, and it's one that we have to fight, and one that Jesus taught us to fight. We can't teach our kids to be envious. We have to teach them the opposite, to admire success and to be successful themselves. And I think that that's something that America has always been very successful at, right? That's why there's such a culture of entrepreneurship in this country. And that's why the left in this country has resorted to other division tactics, not just class, but race and gender as well. And it's just a different version of a class warfare. It's a race warfare, it's a gender warfare, it's whatever has to be done and lied to divide the population and conquer. I think that yes, of course, schools can change things, and we should do that, but really most of it comes from the family. I think that parents, I was very fortunate that despite all the bad things that I went through in Venezuela, I had a fantastic family that taught me well. And I think that if parents take over value lessons for their children and not just leave it exported, outsource it to the schools, then we can actually change that. Imagine if all conservatives did that. If all conservatives did that with their children, we would have no problems in this country at all. But the truth is that the children of conservative Americans are becoming socialists. And I've had many concerned parents come to me and ask me, how do I stop this? And I sympathize. And yes, it's teaching the stories, it's giving them the resources, it's talking about politics in class, in the dinner table. Many parents are like, we don't talk about politics at the dinner table. No, that cannot ever happen again. We have to talk about politics at the dinner table with children. I know in my family we always did, right? Because we live in a totalitarian regime, so we all hated the government, and you just got, into that state of thinking. Something I want to leave you with that I think it's very important before we go into the Q&A is that I've always thought of America as a nation that is based on ideas, and it's the ideas of freedom. It's an open, free, and tolerant society. For that to be the case, Americans have to be able to be free to choose between bad and good, between evil and good. But the truth is that, yes, Americans are free to choose now, but they're not informed on that choice. Americans are not informed into what's evil and what's good. And that's our task here. Yes, we cannot force people into not being socialists. We cannot, predetermine political outcomes. We will always be a democracy, but we have to be able to teach people what's good and what's bad. And that's our task at hand. And I think that we can achieve it with our stories. We can achieve it with our families. And sometimes not everything is about the government. A lot of it is about our own individual action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I'd like to open it up immediately to questions because I heard some comments already from the audience. So please raise your hand and let's have some discussion. Yes, sir.
I don't know how much of a question, but I just want to say, I've heard a few of you referring to, I think we need to simplify in that, it's the battle of good and evil, and I've come to see that. I didn't grow up with that, and the human nature, and especially a couple of them young people that was up there earlier. That's all.
I want to follow up. Yes, it's a battle of good and evil. And something I didn't mention, but that it's important, this is an international battle. This is not just a battle in the United States. And the things that happen abroad affect us. And the things that happen in America affect the rest of the world. The Venezuelan regime, the Cuban regime, Rosa Maria Payá talked about this. What's happening in Venezuela wouldn't be happening if Cuba hadn't become a socialist state. I don't know if you know this, but Cuba tried to invade Venezuela in the 1960s. And the reason they got expelled from the Organization of American States was not because Castro took over Cuba, but it was actually because the Venezuelan government requested their expulsion. And so the Cubans have been trying to take control of Venezuela for a very long time. Why? Because of the oil industry, because they want free oil. That's how they maintain their parasitic economy, just like now we're parasites ourselves. And other parts of Latin America are falling into that. Peru now has a president that is a self-avowed Maoist. Argentina is under the same crooked regime of Fernandez and the Kirchner. Chile has a presidential election soon. Brazil, Lula may get back into power. In Colombia, we may lose the most important U.S. ally in the region to Petro, a friend of Maduro. We have that not just in Latin America, but in the rest of the world. In Europe, the vice president of Spain until recently was Pablo Iglesias, who was a contractor for Hugo Chavez and got paid 5 million euros, who has a shirt of him. He was the vice president of Spain, a European country, a U.S. ally, a NATO member. That's happening without us doing anything about it. We need, as the United States of America, to understand that if we are the only island of freedom left in the world, we're not going to be able to survive. We need to support our allies around the world to keep them free.
Thanks for watching the Heritage Foundation's YouTube channel. With more than 500,000 members, we are the nation's largest conservative research and education institution. We believe the principles and ideas of the American founding are worth conserving and renewing. Please help us further our mission by subscribing to this channel and sharing our videos with your family and friends.